He dunked her head in the sink, but he didn't know she could fight back like a champion. Jada had always been quiet at her school. A straight-A student, polite and focused, she often kept to herself, but that didn't stop her from being noticed in the wrong way. Trey, the school's most notorious bully, had a new obsession, making Jada his next victim. It started with small insults in the hallway, but soon escalated to pushing and shoving. Jada's friends warned her, but she stayed calm. What they didn't know was her secret. She had been training in Taekwondo since she was 6, earning her black belt by the age of 14. Monday mornings were always the worst, but this one felt particularly heavy. The fluorescent lights of the school cafeteria buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, sterile glow on the long rows of tables crowded with chatting students. Jada carried her lunch tray carefully, balancing a sandwich, a carton of milk, and a small container of fruit, her steps measured as she navigated through the sea of students. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for a quiet corner where she could eat in peace, but her search was cut short by the familiar jeer she had grown all too accustomed to. There he was, Trey, lean, smug, and exuding an arrogance that made everyone either avoid him or bow to his taunts. He leaned against the edge of a table, arms crossed, a sly grin plastered across his face as he spotted her. "Hey, nerd," he called out loud enough for several nearby tables to snicker. "Don't spill your soup all over yourself." A twinge of anxiety shot through Jada, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. Trey thrived on reactions, and she had learned over the years to control hers. She knew that any outward display of fear or anger only made him more relentless. Today, however, something felt different. Today, something inside her stirred, a quiet storm gathering momentum. Before she could even respond, Trey moved, fast, too fast. He grabbed her head with a rough grip, and before Jada could resist, he yanked her forward and dunked it into the stainless steel sink used by the cafeteria staff to rinse trays. The water was icy, shocking her senses, and the cafeteria erupted into whispers, gasps, and muffled laughter. Water dripped down her hair and ran down her face, stinging her eyes, but through the haze of shock, Jada felt a strange clarity. Time slowed. The jeers faded into a distant hum. Her senses sharpened. The taste of chlorinated water lingered in her mouth, but it was as though her body had shifted into a state she had never accessed before. Every movement of Trey's hand, every shift in his balance, every faint expression on his face was suddenly in sharp focus. Jada's hands shot out. One grabbed the edge of the sink to steady herself, the other twisted slightly, generating a burst of leverage she had never thought she could muster. With a sudden, fluid motion, she pulled herself up, lifting her dripping body from the sink. Water splashed across the linoleum, leaving dark, wet patterns in her wake. Her eyes, wide and blazing with a fierce determination, locked onto Trey. The cafeteria went silent, a collective pause hanging in the air, as if everyone sensed the shift in energy around them. Trey's smirk faltered. He took a step back, unsure now, sensing something in her that he hadn't before. What?" he stammered. Jada straightened, shaking the excess water from her hair. Her breathing was steady, her body alive with adrenaline and quiet fury. She realized, in that instant, that she was not the same person he had pushed around countless times before. She was someone who could fight back, someone who had limits that could no longer be crossed. But she didn't strike, not yet. Instead, she looked around the cafeteria, scanning faces. Some were wide-eyed with shock, others tried to hide their smirks, unsure whether to laugh or avert their gaze. Even the teachers on duty seemed momentarily frozen, their pens hovering over grade books and lunch count sheets. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips, not a smile of mockery, but one of quiet triumph. She stepped away from the sink, water dripping from her sleeves and hair, each droplet shimmering under the harsh fluorescent lights like tiny prisms of newfound power. Every step she took was deliberate, measured, and unyielding. Trey, now fully aware that the power dynamics had shifted, opened his mouth, but no words came. His confidence had evaporated, leaving only hesitation. The cafeteria that had moments ago been filled with whispered giggles and idle chatter now held a tangible tension. Jada's classmates watched, captivated, sensing that they were witnessing something rare, someone standing unshakably in their own strength. Jada reached her table. Her tray clattered slightly as she set it down, the sound loud in the quiet room. She took her seat, keeping her gaze steady on Trey for one final heartbeat, then focused on opening her milk carton, the action mundane yet defiant. It was as if she were declaring, without words, that she would not be intimidated. She would not be reduced to fear or humiliation. And yet inside, her heart still raced. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, leaving her both exhilarated and wary. She knew this incident would not go unnoticed. Whispers would ripple through the school, tales exaggerated, reputations tested. But for the first time in a long while, Jada felt a sense of control. She had been pushed, humiliated, and underestimated, but she had emerged unbroken, a force quietly gathering within her. As she took a sip of her milk, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of all the times she had been bullied, all the times she had stayed silent, and realized that the fear that once ruled her was now tempered by resolve. She was learning that courage wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was measured, precise, and unflinchingly calm. Trey lingered near the edge of the cafeteria, still unsure whether to approach, whether to confront, or whether to retreat entirely. Jada's eyes followed him, unblinking. She didn't need to raise her voice or make threats. Her presence alone was enough to convey the message. She was no longer a victim, and she was no longer afraid. And in that moment, Jada understood something vital. This was not just about a dunk in the sink, a moment of public humiliation. It was about reclaiming her own power, defining her own limits, and standing in the truth of who she was. The world might try to push her down, but she would rise every single time. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Students shuffled to their next classes, whispering and glancing back at her. Jada left the cafeteria last, water still dripping from her hair, but each step felt lighter, stronger, more determined. The incident in the sink would be remembered, but not for the humiliation she endured. It would be remembered for the quiet, unstoppable strength she displayed when it mattered most. And somewhere deep inside, a spark had been lit. A spark that promised she would never again be underestimated, never again be silenced, and never again be a victim. The tension in the cafeteria was palpable. The echoes of the water splashing from the sink incident still lingered in the air like a charged current, humming just beneath the chatter of curious students. Jada stood near the center of the room, dripping and composed, her chest rising and falling in controlled breaths, eyes locked on Trey. She could feel every stare in the cafeteria, every whisper, every pause. They were all waiting to see what would happen next, but she didn't care about the audience. Today was not about them. It was about setting a line, drawing a boundary that no one could cross. Trey, on the other hand, was smirking again, or at least he tried. The confidence that had radiated from him earlier had dimmed, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He took a step forward, then hesitated, as if measuring the risk. "You're crazy," he muttered under his breath, but the words were louder than he intended. His friends snickered nervously behind him, sensing that the dynamic had shifted, but unwilling to intervene. Jada's mind was clear, razor-sharp. She felt the adrenaline from the sink incident still coursing through her veins, heightening her awareness. Every movement in the cafeteria, the shuffle of feet, the clatter of trays, the shifting of chairs, registered in her senses. Her body, once tense with fear, was now primed with purpose. She knew that running or screaming would only reinforce the old narrative, the one where she was the victim. Instead, she chose control, calm control. Slowly, deliberately, Jada took a step back, creating space between herself and Trey. She adopted a stance she had practiced countless times in the privacy of her room, in the mirror, and on the dojo mats, feet grounded, knees slightly bent, arms raised in measured readiness. Her eyes never wavered from his. In that gaze was a silent message, clear and unyielding: "Cross me, and there will be consequences." "Do that again, and you'll regret it," she said, her voice steady, calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge. The words were simple, but the weight behind them made the cafeteria fall silent. A collective intake of breath swept through the students. Even the teachers on duty paused, sensing something extraordinary about to unfold. Trey laughed, the sound forced and brittle. "Oh yeah, what are you gonna do? Hit me with your lunch tray?" He stepped closer, trying to project bravado, trying to reclaim control, but there was a hesitation in his movements that hadn't been there before. Jada's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. This was her moment. She had trained for situations like this, not just physically, but mentally. Her body had learned the language of balance, timing, and precision. She felt it now, a convergence of reflexes and focus, every muscle coiled like a spring. Then in one fluid motion, she executed a spinning kick. Her foot arced through the air with a controlled power born of countless hours of practice. Trey's eyes widened in disbelief as her leg connected, not violently, but with enough force to knock his balance off and send him stumbling backward. His arms flailed instinctively, but he couldn't regain his footing. The cafeteria erupted, not in laughter, not in chaos, but in astonished gasps. Her friends, who had been frozen in a mixture of fear and anticipation, watched in awe. Their mouths hung slightly open, unable to form words fast enough to express what they had just witnessed. They saw Jada not just as the girl who had been dunked in the sink moments before, but as someone entirely transformed. Confidence radiated from her in waves. Precision, strength, control, she was a force to be reckoned with. Trey's smirk had vanished entirely. His eyes darted around, searching for some escape, some backup, but it was too late. The power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. He was no longer the dominant presence. He was the one on edge, unsure, vulnerable. Every student in the cafeteria now understood what Jada already knew. She was not someone to mess with, not today, not ever. Jada's breathing remained steady, her stance relaxed but ready. She didn't follow up with another move because she didn't have to. The message had been delivered. This was not about proving physical dominance. It was about showing self-respect, about declaring her boundaries in a world that often tried to ignore them. The fear she had once carried had transformed into resolve, a quiet but undeniable power that radiated from her in every controlled movement. A few students whispered to each other, their voices tinged with awe. "Did you see that kick?" one asked. Another shook their head. "I didn't know she could do that." Even some of Trey's friends looked impressed, silently acknowledging the shift in the cafeteria hierarchy. Trey, now trying to regain composure, muttered under his breath, "This isn't over." But the tone lacked conviction. He had learned, perhaps for the first time, that intimidation alone could not bend everyone to his will. Jada had demonstrated that courage, skill, and composure could equalize the scales in an instant. Jada straightened fully, letting the stance fall naturally. She glanced briefly at her friends, who had now begun to gather courage from her display. There was a flicker of pride in her chest, not arrogance, but satisfaction, the satisfaction of standing firm in her truth, of embodying the power that had been dormant inside her for too long. The cafeteria slowly returned to its rhythm, but the energy had shifted irreversibly. Conversations were hushed, movements cautious. Students glanced at Jada with newfound respect, some with curiosity, others with admiration. She knew that rumors of today's incident would spread quickly, tales growing with each retelling, but she welcomed it. Let them speak. Let them remember. As she collected her tray and prepared to leave, Jada felt a strange calm wash over her. The fear that had once dictated her actions was gone, replaced by a steady, unwavering confidence. She had faced aggression, not with panic, not with flight, but with skill and poise. And in doing so, she had carved a place for herself that no bully, no sneer, and no careless act could undermine. Trey stumbled out of the cafeteria, shoulders slumped, eyes flicking back to Jada one last time. His laughter was gone, replaced with a grudging acknowledgement. This was a battle lost without a single punch thrown, and though the school day would continue, the hierarchy had shifted. Jada was no longer invisible. She was no longer a target. She was a force, calm and deliberate, and unmistakably strong. And deep within her, a quiet promise formed. This was only the beginning. Strength wasn't just about defending herself, it was about owning every part of her existence, standing tall in every challenge that came her way, and never again letting fear dictate her actions. Today, she had shown strength. Tomorrow, she would define it. The final bell rang, signaling the end of another school day, but for Jada, the events in the cafeteria had made time stretch unnaturally, as if the echoes of her spinning kick and the stunned gasps of her peers were suspended in the air. Walking down the crowded hallways, she could feel eyes on her, some curious, some wary, some outright admiring. The story of her confrontation with Trey had already begun to circulate, growing with each retelling, exaggerated in tone, but never losing the kernel of truth. Jada had stood her ground and come out unshaken. Lockers clanged and shoes squeaked on polished floors as students moved in clusters, gossiping in rapid whispers. "Did you see what she did?" one girl asked, nudging her friend. "She actually knocked him off his feet." Another boy shook his head, or in his voice, "I didn't know she could move like that. She's like a real fighter." The nickname had begun to stick even before the words left their mouths. The Taekwondo champion. Jada didn't need the title. She had never sought recognition for her skills. But hearing it whispered with respect, curiosity, and just a hint of reverence stirred something quiet and satisfying inside her. Her teachers, too, were impressed. Mrs. Carter, the English teacher who often worried about bullying in her classes, had watched the cafeteria security footage and noted not just the skill in Jada's movements, but the calm, unshakable composure she displayed under pressure. "That girl," Mrs. Carter said to a colleague, "is more than capable of defending herself, and she did it with grace without letting anger control her. That's rare for anyone her age." Even the principal, who rarely commented on day-to-day incidents unless serious injury occurred, had called Jada to the office to commend her for her courage and presence of mind. Meanwhile, Trey, humiliated beyond measure, had retreated into the shadows of his social circle, avoiding her completely. His arrogance, once so dominant, had been punctured in a single, decisive moment. He tried to appear nonchalant, tossing casual glances over his shoulder as if he hadn't noticed, but the slight twitch in his posture betrayed the anxiety he felt every time he passed her in the hall. The power dynamics had shifted, and even he knew it. Other students, those who had previously targeted weaker peers or stayed silent while watching bullying unfold, began to think twice. Whispers of caution circulated, creating a ripple effect across the grade. "If she can do that to Trey," one boy muttered, "what would happen if someone tried it with me?" A hush of hesitation followed. For the first time in months, the corridors seemed charged not with fear for themselves, but with respect for someone who had shown what it meant to stand firm. Jada herself noticed these changes but remained calm, choosing not to gloat. She had never wanted notoriety or validation for her skills. Still, she felt the subtle warmth of empowerment spread through her chest. She realized that courage had a ripple effect, that one act, executed with composure and strength, could shift the energy of an entire school. As she walked past groups of students, she overheard fragments of conversation that made her heart both swell and ache in the same instant. "I can't believe she stayed so calm. I'd never have that courage. She didn't even look scared." Each comment reinforced what she had already sensed. The incident was no longer just about her and Trey. It had become a quiet lesson in courage, self-respect, and standing up for oneself, demonstrating that intimidation could be met with skill and poise rather than anger or panic. In the cafeteria, teachers now patrolled with renewed awareness, seeing students in a new light. They noticed subtle shifts in behavior. Those who might have been targets were holding their heads higher, speaking with a newfound confidence. Bullying incidents had not disappeared entirely, but there was a visible change. Even small acts of intimidation were now met with hesitation. The whispers about Jada had created an invisible boundary, one that others were wary of crossing. Jada's friends, who had witnessed her actions firsthand, were especially affected. Their admiration went beyond the physical display of skill. They were inspired by her mindset, her restraint, and the way she had managed to control a volatile situation without losing her dignity. "She's amazing," one whispered to another. "I want to be that brave someday." There was no jealousy, no resentment, just a quiet, growing respect and the desire to emulate her courage. By the end of the day, the story had solidified into legend, the type of story that students would repeat for weeks, embellishing the details, yet never altering the truth at its core. Jada had confronted a bully, asserted her boundaries, and done so with unwavering calm and skill. She had become a symbol, a quiet exemplar of strength, showing that power was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and moral. Jada walked out of the school that afternoon, backpack slung over her shoulder, her uniform damp from the morning's incident, but her step light and deliberate. She sensed the eyes of peers following her, and though she didn't turn to acknowledge them, she felt the silent acknowledgement, the unspoken respect that had been earned. Trey remained in the shadows of the hallways, humiliated, avoiding confrontation, while other bullies weighed their actions carefully, realizing that intimidation had limits. For Jada, the victory was not in defeating one boy, it was in establishing a precedent. She had demonstrated that strength could be wielded with control and that courage had a ripple effect far beyond the individual. And as she stepped into the sunlight outside the school, she felt a quiet sense of pride and possibility. The world had just glimpsed the power she carried, not just in her body, but in her mind, her resolve, and the unyielding courage that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to shine. Jada was no longer invisible. She was no longer just a student navigating the perils of high school social hierarchies. She was a force, a symbol, and a promise that those who sought to intimidate would have to think twice. And in that, she found not arrogance, but freedom, the freedom to walk through her world unafraid, unshaken, and undeniably strong. The days after the cafeteria incident passed in a blur, but for Jada, each one brought a new awareness of the power she now held, not in brute strength, but in the quiet authority of self-respect and confidence. Walking through the school halls, she noticed subtle shifts everywhere. Students who had once slouched under the weight of bullying now held their heads higher, speaking more confidently, moving with a sense of agency. Even teachers remarked on the difference, noting that the atmosphere in the hallways and classrooms had improved. Jada realized, almost to her surprise, that her strength wasn't confined to martial arts alone. Her ability to remain composed under pressure, to act deliberately rather than impulsively, had a ripple effect. It inspired others, created a sense of possibility, and gave courage to those who had felt powerless. The realization struck her like a wave. The real fight was not just physical, it was in empowering others to believe in themselves. It began subtly. One afternoon, as she walked past the library, she noticed a freshman being cornered near the lockers by a group of older students. The tension in the air was palpable. The younger student's hands shook, eyes darting for an escape that wasn't there. Jada didn't hesitate. She approached calmly, her presence alone commanding attention. "Hey," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the corridor. "Back off." The older students laughed nervously, unsure how to respond to someone who radiated such quiet confidence. They hesitated, then muttered excuses, stepping aside. The freshman's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thanks," the student whispered, eyes wide. Jada simply nodded, offering a reassuring smile, and continued on her way. From that day on, she began taking small steps to support others regularly. She taught classmates simple self-defense techniques during lunch breaks in the gym, demonstrating stances, blocks, and controlled strikes. Her methods emphasized calm, control, and awareness rather than aggression. "It's not about fighting," she told them. "It's about being prepared, knowing your boundaries, and standing tall when others try to push you down." Her words, combined with her visible skill, made an impression. Students who had never imagined themselves capable of defending themselves began to practice, gaining confidence with each session. Jada's circle of friends grew naturally. They were drawn not only to her martial skill, but to the steady reassurance and encouragement she provided. Among them were students who had previously been targets of bullying, students who had kept to themselves, and even a few who had once walked the line of intimidation, but now sought to channel their energy positively. Together, they formed a network of mutual support, a small but growing community grounded in courage and respect. Her influence extended beyond physical skills. She helped classmates build confidence in their voices, encouraging them to speak up when they were mistreated or when they saw others in trouble. Students began to step forward in classrooms, debates, and group projects, buoyed by the knowledge that courage could take many forms, not just the ability to fight, but the willingness to assert oneself, to advocate for fairness, and to stand with others. One afternoon, as she sat on the bleachers in the gym, helping a group of girls practice stance techniques, she felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. They were laughing, correcting each other gently, and moving with a newfound confidence. One girl, who had always shrunk in the presence of bullies, executed a perfectly balanced stance and looked at Jada with wide eyes. "I didn't know I could do that," she said, voice trembling with excitement. Jada smiled, nodding, "You can. You just needed to believe it." Teachers began to notice these changes too. Mr. Chen, the PE instructor, commented to a colleague, "I've never seen so many students take initiative in their own defense. And they're doing it without aggression, just confidence. That girl Jada is something else." Even students who had been distant or indifferent started seeking her guidance, drawn to the authenticity and quiet strength she exuded. Her reputation as a symbol of strength continued to grow, but Jada carried it with humility. She never sought attention or accolades. To her, the real reward was seeing someone who had felt powerless now stand tall, or witnessing a student who had feared confrontation walk through the halls with steady, confident steps. Each small victory was a reminder that courage was contagious and that true power lay in lifting others as you rise. Over time, her network of friends began to expand into a community. They shared ideas, encouraged each other, and stood together in the face of challenges. Students once hesitant to defend themselves now acted with awareness and poise, using the techniques Jada had taught to set boundaries and de-escalate confrontations. Bullies began to encounter unexpected resistance, not necessarily in the form of fights, but through the collective confidence and preparedness of their peers. Even Trey, the boy who had once humiliated her, became a peripheral figure in her world. His avoidance of confrontation was noticeable, his attempts at intimidation no longer effective. Jada's presence alone served as a deterrent to him and others who thought strength could be equated with fear. The halls of the school had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Respect was no longer demanded through threats. It was earned through integrity, composure, and empowerment. One afternoon, as Jada watched her friends practice techniques in the gym, she realized the full extent of the transformation. She had become more than a skilled martial artist. She had become a mentor, a leader, and a source of inspiration. Her courage had created a chain reaction, touching lives she hadn't anticipated, reshaping the social dynamics of her school, and giving students a vision of what strength really meant. And in that moment, she understood something vital. Empowerment was not about defeating others. It was about uplifting them, teaching them to find their own strength, and showing them that courage was not a trait reserved for a select few. It was a choice, available to anyone willing to claim it. Jada smiled quietly, watching her friends execute a sequence of moves with precision and confidence. She knew the journey was far from over. Challenges would come, new bullies would appear, and doubt would creep into the hearts of her peers. But she also knew that the foundation had been laid. A foundation of courage, friendship, and self-respect that could not easily be shaken. She had learned that real strength was multifaceted. It lived in the body, the mind, and the heart. And she had discovered that the greatest power of all was the ability to inspire others to find that strength within themselves. The ripple effect of her actions had begun, and she knew, without doubt, that it would continue to grow, shaping not just her world, but the lives of everyone around her. Jada was quiet, strong, and unstoppable. Months had passed since the infamous sink incident, yet the ripples of Jada's actions continued to resonate throughout the school. Hallways that once echoed with the laughter of bullies and the whispered fears of students now carried a different energy, a subtle but undeniable sense of respect and awareness. Jada moved through these halls with a quiet confidence, not arrogance, but an unshakable poise that made it clear she would not be intimidated. Her reputation as the Taekwondo champion had grown beyond just her skill. It was her composure, her self-respect, and the way she lifted others that had made her formidable in the eyes of both peers and teachers. It was during a warm, late afternoon, just after the final bell, that the moment Jada had anticipated yet hoped would never come finally arrived. Trey, looking more desperate than defiant, appeared in the courtyard near the back entrance, where a few students were gathered after school. He leaned against a brick wall, trying to project a sense of dominance, but his posture betrayed nervousness. His eyes flicked toward Jada as she approached with her backpack slung casually over one shoulder, each step measured, deliberate, radiating calm. "Hey Jada," Trey called out, his voice wavering slightly despite the effort to sound confident. "You think you're so tough, huh?" Jada stopped a few feet away, locking eyes with him. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply exhaled slowly, her presence alone conveying an unspoken truth. She was not afraid, and she had no intention of escalating the situation. Students nearby sensed the tension and instinctively formed a loose semicircle, curious yet cautious. Trey took a step forward, then paused, as if measuring whether he could assert control without risk. I just want to see if you're as tough as everyone says," he stammered, trying to salvage some semblance of bravado. Jada's gaze remained steady. There was no anger, no need to prove herself physically. She understood that true strength was not in reacting to provocation, but in maintaining control over one's mind and emotions. Her calm presence, her confidence, and the respect she had earned over the months were enough. "You don't have to prove anything," she said softly, but every word carried weight. "I already know who I am, and you should know by now that intimidation doesn't work with me or with anyone else I care about." Trey blinked, and for the first time, he realized just how powerless he had become. The energy he once commanded through fear was gone, dissipated by months of quiet strength, skill, and the way Jada had influenced her peers. He glanced around, noticing the students who had once laughed at his antics now watching silently, their expressions expectant, some even filled with quiet approval for Jada. His hands trembled slightly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Every tactic he had used before, mockery, aggression, intimidation, was rendered ineffective by a single force, Jada's unwavering calm and presence. He had learned, finally, that strength was not measured by how loudly one could dominate, but by how firmly one could stand in truth, without fear, without anger, and without the need to prove oneself physically. For a long moment, there was only silence. The wind rustled through the courtyard, the distant laughter of students fading into the background. Trey shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting from Jada to the onlookers, realizing that his attempts at control had failed completely. His reputation, fragile as it had been, had crumbled under the weight of something he had never anticipated: the quiet authority of a girl who had mastered both body and mind. Finally, Trey let out a shaky breath, a mix of frustration, fear, and reluctant respect. I guess you're stronger than I thought," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Jada nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than triumph. She didn't gloat. There was no need. The lesson had been delivered. Strength, she understood, was not about defeating someone else, but about maintaining composure, standing firm, and inspiring others to do the same. Around them, students began to disperse quietly, carrying with them the image of a confrontation that ended without violence, yet conveyed far more than any physical fight ever could. Whispers spread. "She didn't even fight him and he backed down. It's like she's untouchable, not just physically, but in confidence and composure." Jada's influence had become so pervasive that even the bravest bullies now hesitated before attempting to assert dominance. Trey took a few steps back, running a hand through his hair, his pride bruised but his understanding clearer than ever. He had learned the hard way that strength wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and moral. Power wielded with calm, clarity, and integrity carried far more weight than any force applied in anger or fear. Jada turned and walked away, her steps steady, her back straight, and her mind at ease. The confrontation was over, but the lesson extended far beyond the courtyard. Every student who had witnessed it would carry that moment forward, the day that a single girl's courage, composure, and quiet authority had reshaped the balance of power. She passed her friends, who greeted her with smiles and nods, their admiration deepened not just by her skill, but by the grace with which she had handled the situation. Together, they walked toward the school exit, a group strengthened not just by physical ability, but by mutual respect, confidence, and the knowledge that true power came from standing in one's own strength while lifting others up. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting golden light across the courtyard, Jada felt a deep, serene satisfaction. This final confrontation had been about more than stopping a bully. It had been about demonstrating the true nature of strength, mental resilience, emotional control, and unwavering integrity. It was about showing that courage and composure could change hearts and minds without a single blow. Jada's journey was far from over, but in this moment, she understood a fundamental truth. The strongest person in the room isn't always the one who strikes first, but the one who stands firm, knows their worth, and inspires others to do the same. And for the first time, Trey and anyone else who had underestimated her understood that Jada's power extended far beyond martial arts. It was unstoppable, quiet, and enduring, a force that no one could challenge without first confronting themselves. Life after the school year's turbulence carried a new rhythm for Jada. While the corridors of her school had been forever changed by her courage, The world outside those walls offered new arenas, new challenges, and even greater opportunities to grow. Taekwondo, which had begun as a personal discipline, evolved into a stage for her skill, focus, and resilience. She trained harder than ever, pushing herself through grueling drills, mastering intricate forms, and refining techniques that demanded both mental clarity and physical precision. Every kick, punch, and stance became an extension of the discipline, patience, and control she had cultivated inside the school walls. Her weekends were filled with tournaments. The state-level competitions were intense, brimming with talented athletes who had dedicated years to the sport. The air in the arenas smelled faintly of sweat and polished mats, punctuated by the sharp shouts of referees and the rhythmic thuds of controlled strikes. Jada moved with poise, executing spinning kicks, flawless blocks, and lightning-fast combinations. Each medal she earned was more than a testament to physical skill. It reflected her unwavering focus, mental discipline, and relentless dedication. Coaches nodded in approval, impressed not just by her form, but by the calm intensity she carried onto the mat. Judges whispered about her composure, spectators leaned forward to watch every movement, and competitors often found themselves unnerved by her quiet confidence. Yet despite the growing stack of medals on her shelf, Jada's pride did not stem from victories on a mat. Her heart swelled with something far deeper, the transformation she had sparked among her peers, the ripple effect of courage and empowerment she had ignited. Students who had once whispered in fear now walked taller. Friends who had been timid now spoke up for themselves and others. Bullying incidents had sharply decreased, and the sense of community at her school had strengthened, built on respect, integrity, and confidence. Teachers marveled at the change, sometimes pointing to Jada's influence in casual conversations. It's amazing what a single student's courage can do for a school culture. Jada reflected on these changes often. She remembered the fear she had felt in the cafeteria, the shock of being dunked into a sink, and the moments of adrenaline-fueled clarity that had transformed her into someone capable of standing her ground. She realized that true strength was more than a physical display. It was the ability to control oneself, to inspire others, and to create a safer, more empowered environment. Each time she taught a younger student a self-defense technique, guided a peer through a difficult social situation, or simply offered reassurance to someone struggling with confidence, she felt the same spark she had felt months ago in the cafeteria. Her leadership extended beyond martial arts. Jada began mentoring students in practical ways, how to navigate challenging interactions with poise, how to set boundaries firmly but respectfully, and how to cultivate inner strength without relying on intimidation or aggression. She helped organize workshops on bullying awareness, combining self-defense training with lessons in emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. Students were encouraged to share their experiences, practice assertive communication, and recognize that courage could be expressed in many ways, not just through physical skill. Jada's workshops became a safe haven for students who had previously felt powerless, a space where voices were heard, fears were acknowledged, and confidence was nurtured. Her friends continued to rally around her, forming a support network that emphasized growth, accountability, and mutual respect. Together, they created an environment where students felt empowered to take action when witnessing injustice. Peer support programs flourished, inspired by Jada's example, and the social dynamics of the school shifted permanently. Respect was earned through integrity, courage, and collaboration, rather than fear or dominance. Outside of school, Jada's impact was noticed by her community. Coaches from other schools and clubs recognized her as a disciplined, resilient athlete and mentor. She received invitations to participate in larger tournaments, seminars, and youth leadership programs. While her medals were celebrated, her true fulfillment came from seeing young students, some of them previously shy, anxious, or fearful, find their own voice, assert their presence, and embrace their abilities. Every training session and competition also reinforced a life lesson Jada had learned in the school cafeteria. That strength was multifaceted. It was physical, yes, but it was also mental, emotional, and social. The calmness she maintained in tense situations, the confidence she projected, and the empathy she showed toward those in need had become her greatest tools. These qualities, combined with her skill in Taekwondo, made her a formidable presence both on the mat and in life. One afternoon, after winning another state-level match, Jada stood on the podium, gold medal around her neck. The applause of the crowd was deafening, yet as she looked out, her thoughts were not on personal glory. She thought of the students she had inspired, the friends who had grown alongside her, and the small acts of courage she had witnessed over the months. Each moment reminded her that influence and leadership were more valuable than any accolade. Her journey had begun with a single act of standing up for herself. It had grown into a movement within her school, a culture shift, and a personal evolution into a leader. Jada had discovered that courage was not a solitary achievement. It was contagious, capable of transforming not only individuals but entire communities. The medals and trophies were tangible symbols of effort, but the true reward lay in the lives she touched and the culture of empowerment she had nurtured. And so Jada continued to train, compete, and inspire. She embodied the balance between strength and compassion, skill and humility. Her influence spread quietly but powerfully, reaching far beyond the school walls. Students who had once felt powerless now understood that bravery could be cultivated, that resilience could be learned, and that one person's courage could spark a movement of change. Jada's story became a testament to what it meant to lead through action, to inspire through example, and to wield strength with integrity. She was no longer just a fighter. She was a mentor, a role model, and a symbol of empowerment. Her legacy was not measured solely by medals or victories, but by the courage she instilled in others, the friendships she forged, and the culture of confidence and respect she created. Through it all, Jada knew one simple truth. The greatest strength lay not in defeating others, but in uplifting them, teaching them to find their own courage, and showing the world that resilience, confidence, and leadership were the most powerful forms of victory. Jada wasn't just a fighter, she was a leader, a beacon, and an unstoppable force whose influence would echo far beyond the walls of her school.